I work for One Northwest, and I spend my days making plone work better than it is working. So I hopefully know a little bit about this. Just to go over quickly what we're going to cover, I'm going to talk about just some basic steps that you should do to prepare for debugging. I'm going to talk about different tools you can use for debugging plone. I'm going to go through 2 quick case studies of solving actual problems that were encountered in the wild, and then I'm going to just go through some miscellaneous tips and tricks if we have time. So this is, just raise your hand, who in this room considers themselves a developer? Okay, there's a good number of hands, but also a number of people without hands up, and that's great. This is intended for people who are just beginning with developing or don't have a lot of experience as a developer. But I think if you are more experienced, then you'll also probably learn a few things, because I did when I was creating this. So you're going along in plone, and things are looking great. You've got your new site set up, you change the title, and boom, you click on something and it breaks. We've all seen this. What's your reaction? If you're a new programmer, just new to plone, your reaction is probably absolute terror. This is supposed to work, right? What's going on? If you're an experienced programmer, though, what's your reaction? Absolute terror as well, because you have no idea what's going on. Maybe it's a little bug, something you can take care of really quickly. But a bug's like a cave. You don't know what's in there. It could be anything from a trivial typo to some sort of logic error, something you forgot to consider, or it could just be something very weird about Zope that is going to take you days to figure out, or hopefully you don't have to figure it out yourself. But you don't know when you first look at that bug. So as we start to talk about how do you prepare to debug, the most important thing is mental preparation. You've got to be ready to tackle this thing that you don't know what it is. So to do that, remember you're in control, actually. This is a computer system you're working with. It's following rules. It's following instructions. You may not have written, somebody may not have written those instructions directly, or you may be working with some weird thing, but you can, if you look, figure out what's going on. Remember, you're not alone. You're part of this community that you're experiencing this week. There are people on IRC and on mailing lists who can help you. Many people have seen the same problems you're seeing, so take advantage of that resource. Third thing, just remember that you got the source code, so use it. That may sound scary if you haven't looked at source code before, but one of the great things about this language we've got, Python, is that it's really very readable. You don't actually have to have studied Python in order to look at it and make some educated guesses about what it's doing, and perhaps figure out something that's doing wrong. So I would encourage you to just dive in and look if you haven't done that yet before. So getting ready to debug. These are kind of the ground rules, things that you should do, because if you don't do them, you won't get all the information you could be getting. And just things that will help us all be on the same page if you do need to talk to somebody else. First of all, I'm going to talk about some debugging tools. Never install those on a production site. There's 2 reasons. There's security. It might expose information that you don't want everybody to know about. Second reason is performance. A lot of these tools are looking at deep into parts of the system, and in order to do that, they need to do some extra processing, and it takes longer. So we've got build out these days to repeatedly deploy something so you can easily make a copy of your site on your local computer or some staging server in order to do your debugging there. So I'd encourage you to do that. Always run Zope in foreground mode. This is just, it has to do with how you start up Zope on the command line. I'm going to do this now. I've got a terminal here, and I'm going to change into the directory where I have my build out for this talk. If I can type. I'm going to start it in foreground mode by putting FG at the end there. And foreground mode just means that whenever there's an error in your site, it's going to print it out right here on the console. Let me zoom back out. It's also going to print up some extra information as it's starting, and it's just a lot easier to find out messages and warnings from Zope about what's going on. You should also turn on verbose security, and this is just a setting in your build out or in your zope.conf file, which tells Zope that if you run into an error that's due to somebody not having permission to access some particular thing, it's not just going to tell you you don't have access. It's going to tell you you don't have access because you have this role, etc. So it makes it easier to figure out that sort of error. And a final point of just getting ready to debug, a lot of, oftentimes you'll go to the error log in the ZMI to find your errors. If you're running Zope in foreground mode, you can see them there. You can also see them in the error log, which is under your site at error log. But by default, Zope ignores these two errors, or it ignores several errors which are common in your site, unauthorized errors and not found errors. And that means if you go to a page that's getting those errors, Zope's going to say there was an error, but it's not going to record it in the error log. It's not going to put it out on the console. So this will just make sure that you aren't missing those errors.
So you're adding those comment marks there?
Yeah, exactly. By default, these two comment marks will not be there, and I added those just to stop ignoring them. Okay, people have been debugging Zope for a long time, and people have come up with a lot of different tools for getting information about what's going on. And when you're debugging, the hardest part is knowing what question to ask, because you don't know what's going wrong. But I've tried to categorize these these tools. I've tried to categorize the tools as answers to various questions that you might have. So the first question, you're looking at the site. What is that thing there on the site? So one level of exploring this is just to look at the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript. What are the elements of the page? Not even anything particularly Plone related. Each browser kind of has its own tool for this. Firebug is the one I use most commonly in Firefox, but there's ones for the other browsers. And what this looks like is Firebug gives you a little, let me actually go to the Plone site that I started up. Of course.
You have a typo in localhost here.
Ah, thank you. There's a reason I stuck all those links into the presentation that OpenOffice isn't letting me use. So, got to do this the old-fashioned way. So we've got this button down here, and this pops up this wonderful tool which lets you do all sorts of things. The left pane here is kind of showing the HTML. The right pane is going to show CSS rules if I actually select something. So if I click on the inspect button, I can say, point at any part of the page. It shows me here's its HTML. Over here on the right is its CSS. There are also other tabs for looking at all the CSS rules at once and see what files are loaded. You can go to a script tab and see what JavaScripts are loaded. So this is just a wealth of information, and it's documented elsewhere how to use it. So I'm not going to go into it in detail. Kind of the next level deep is investigating what are the Plone specific elements on the page. What are your viewlets and your portlets? So let me go back here. The tool that is at some point in the near future, I hope, going to be perfect for this. At this point, it's still in alpha. It's still an alpha level software, but is very interesting. It's called Glowworm, and let me. Oh, interesting. Thank you. Log in. Glowworm adds a link down at the bottom of the page which says inspect this page. And when you click on that, you get this Glowworm inspector panel down here at the bottom of the page. And now, similarly to Firebug, I can click around the page, but let me say, for instance, click on the logo up here. Now it gives me some information. It says that this, it tells you what the towel is that's controlling that, but it also, an important piece of information here is it says it's part of the plone.logo viewlet. And if you've learned anything about plone theming, you know that knowing the name of the viewlet is a very important piece if you want to customize that piece of the site. Glowworm also lets you click through and actually customize right here in the UI, but that's still a little bit experimental, so I'm not going to try that right now. Another thing you might want to do is investigate. Okay, we've covered HTML, we've covered the viewlets and portlets, but all of these are kind of a frame around a page which is rendering a particular context in the Plone site. So you might want to ask, what is that context? What can I do with it? And the best tool for that is this nifty thing called Clouseau. And if I pull this up, Clouseau also adds a link down here at the bottom. You got to install it to your site, but you get open a Python prompt here. And I should say, I'm not going into detail on how you install all of these because that's well documented elsewhere. I will try to have slides in an appendix at the end of the slides that get posted online that detail how to install everything, but I don't want to waste time on it. So Clouseau, open a Python prompt here is what Clouseau does, and you just get this line, and you can start typing. So I'm investigating the page context. So start typing context, and I type a dot, and then Clouseau is going to show me all the things which you can do with a page context, which is rather a lot because Zope 2 is kind of messy. But you know, if you look carefully, you might see something that looks interesting. So you might want to investigate, say, the title of that context. So I'll hit that and hit enter. Oh, title is actually a method, so I have to call it. So I'll add some parentheses. And there it prints out the title is Welcome to Plone. Whoops. So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg of what you can do with Clouseau. You can basically enter any Python expression and have it process it and print out what it is. The second kind of question you might want to ask when you're debugging is what code controls this? So I've identified something, but I want to know where do I find it in the code base so I can customize it or figure out how it actually works or something. So really there's nothing much better than just a simple search and replace. grep is the tool of choice on Unix if you're on the command line. If you've got a text editor, it most likely has a multi-file search and replace feature of some sort if it's a good text editor, so you should learn to use that. Also, if you want to speed things up a little bit, there's different indexers like e-tags and glimps that will let you jump around and search without having to wait for it to process everything all the time. But you may be asking, okay, this is great, but what do I search for? Clouseau actually can help you with that. If you're looking at a page template and you see some expression in that page template, you might try entering that thing into Clouseau and see what it says. If you've got access to the page template, you can actually stick in this little snippet where obj over here is just whatever object you're interested in. You can tack on .under class under, and it will then when you load the page just using this template, it will print out what the Python class is of that thing. Once you know the Python module, yeah.
Could you go back to that slide one more time?
Sorry. And these will be on online, and I know I'm going kind of fast through these just in order to get through all this stuff, but I'll leave it up there for a second. You can also come find me afterwards if you don't catch something.
Can you go back one more time?
No, catch me afterwards. I'll show you. Sorry. once you know what the module in the class is, you might want to actually go open up the source code for this thing. And the tool that makes this easier, we've recently switched to a system in which packages for plone and zope are distributed as eggs, which is a real advancement in a lot of ways. It gives us a lot better control over dependencies and things like that. But it does have this disadvantage, which is that if you've ever tried to open anything up in a typical build-out, you end up with all these different eggs that are, there's a folder for each egg, and each egg has its own substructure, and you got all these different versions which might apply to different sites. If you've installed multiple plone sites, you don't know which ones are active for a given site. So it's kind of a mess. So there's a tool called Omelet, which I wrote, which helps solve this problem. And it's a build-out specific tool, so you have to be using build-out. But you basically add a few lines to your build-out, and then Omelet generates a structure that's much more easy to navigate and to search, which looks more like the structure over on the right. So you get one directory kind of for each package, and then whereas here we have plone.app.portlets and plone.app.openid, here we have plone.app, and then inside that we have OpenID and portlets down here.
So it figures out which version you're actually using in your build-out.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It specifically is only including the version for the plone site in which you've created this omelet in the build-out. So it's very useful. Third debugging question, what's that code actually doing? So you found the code, now what's it doing? There's really only one good answer to this, but there are a couple approaches. One thing you can do is you can print things and log things from your Python code. So you can print out a message, or you can, if you got a context, you can call the plone log function on that context and pass in a message. And it's going to print it out on the console. So the way this actually looks, oops, it's a pity these links aren't working, because I don't quite remember the URL here. So let me go find my view. For this talk, I made a special browser view, which it just goes through in a loop, and don't worry too much about the Python here, but it goes through in a loop and prints out a string there, and it also logs a string. So this is just to kind of show you the difference between those two. So if I remind myself what this thing is called, it's called logging demo. So it just says success here, but if I go to the command prompt, you'll see it printed out for each one. It printed out the number, and then the plone log actually printed out some extra information. It printed the time and a log level. So this is just an easy way to get some information out of the program as it's going through. And printing things out like this is particularly useful if you've got something that's going through in a big loop and processing things a number of times, because the next technique is going to let you kind of stop in the middle. But if you're, and kind of look around, but if you're looping through, you're going to hit that thing multiple times, and it just becomes a pain. So this is a useful technique for those sorts of cases.
To print my message, that goes to the console, or goes to the, actually?
It goes to the console. It doesn't render in the browser. Because when you've got a browser view, it's returning a value, and that's what actually gets rendered in the browser, the way Zope's set up. Yeah.
The browser view said self/index, self-index bracket.
You can have various different browser views at different places.
Okay.
Yeah.
You may want to look up in older technologies, print did not go to the console.
Yes.
Like in Python scripts, that's not
Return.
Oh, that's good to know. Joel just pointed out that in kind of old Python scripts, like you might have in a skin layer, which is different than a browser view, if you print something out, it's going to go to your browser rather than to the console. So just a clarification.
The plone log will always work, and is a
Yeah.
good solution for all cases.
Joel says plone log is always a good option. If you want to have a bit more control, rather than just printing something out, you want to kind of stop and look at what some actual values are that some code is working with at some point, then you should use PDB, which is the Python debugger. And this is a really great aspect of working with the Python language. Think of PDB like the pause button on your VCR remote control. Your program is running along, and you hit that button, and it stops, and you can go through frame by frame and kind of see what's going on. PDB is kind of like that. The difference is that with PDB, you have to tell it ahead of time where you want it to pause. So you have to do that before you start up Zope. And you do that by this line here, import PDB, semicolon, pdb.setTrace, and you call it as a method. You can insert this kind of anywhere. This is the one chance where you have to insert this into the core code of plone and Zope kind of with impunity, just to figure out what's going on, as long as you remember to take it out, because otherwise it's going to make you very confused some point later when you're trying to do something and the browser's just spinning and spinning and you don't know what's going on. I'll show you an example of using this a little bit later. Fourth question, we're getting close to the end of these questions here. What's Zope doing right now? What's it, Zope's handling all these requests, and you want to know what sort of request it's handling right at the moment. There's a couple ways to do this. If you're there in ZMI, go to the control panel and debug information. And this screen has lots of things on it. It shows you your Zope version, shows you your Python path, gives you kind of an indication of what objects might be loaded into memory a lot. And then the most important part is down at the bottom, where it shows you for each thread of Zope what it's doing right now and what was requested from a browser. So here we've got 2 threads that aren't doing anything, and then we've got 1 thread here, which if you look down at the bottom, it's this debug info. So this is the thread that's actually rendering this screen that I was displaying. So you can hit this at any time to see what Zope's doing at a given point.
So that would only be useful if it were handling a long-running process or a request at the time you ran this page?
You might hit refresh a few times and see, is it consistently showing a really long time on a request for, a particular type of object. That might give you an indication of something you need to optimize or cache. There's also a product called Deadlock Debugger, which I'm not going to bother showing, but this is just something that you should look into if you're running into a case where Zope just kind of is, spinning. It's just doing something, but you don't know what, and you're trying to figure out what exactly it's doing. This won't just show you the request, what was requested. It'll also show you like where in the code is Zope actually processed something right now. And finally, I'm not going to spend any time on these, but there are tools for figuring out what is making Zope slow. And these are more useful, not so much for if Zope is generally slow. That probably means that you have to boost up your server or get some more memory or do some caching. But if there's particular things in your site that are like unusually slow, this might help you pinpoint what is making those things slow. There's different tools for kind of front-end performance or page template calls or Python calls. And you can look into those, and they're documented elsewhere.
What's the main difference between the page template profiler and, say, the Zope profiler or the call profiler?
So Zope profiler or call profiler are mostly useful for Python code.
Well, the Zope profiler has 2 tabs, basically. They got the Zope view and the Python view, which is, I guess, higher up and lower down.
Okay.
Right?
I'm not actually terribly familiar with these. Does anybody know the difference?
Okay.
Joel?
So profiler and call profiler will tell you what things got called, but they won't give you any information inside the page template what happened. The PT profiler shows you for every expression in the page template how often it got called and how slow it was. So if you think the problem is you have some horrible page template issue, PT profiler will give you insight into the page template. Call profiler just shows you that it called that page template and it took 10 seconds.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's do a real problem here and see how it works. So this is a real problem that plone newbie 4022 showed up in IRC and said, I've got this traceback, can you help me out? So let's go look at the traceback that he saw. This was, I've set up a site here. He was going to the quick installer to try to install something, and he got this error. So shoot, what's going on? This is a traceback, and tracebacks are your friends because they tell you where things are going wrong. traceback is basically showing you kind of the code that's running at a given instant in ZOP. So it's got at the top are kind of the publish calls that start everything off, and then as you go down, you get closer to where you actually are right now. And for each one, it prints out kind of the module and the line number and what method is being run. The most important thing to look for, there's a lot of stuff here, but you want to look down at the very bottom at where it says some sort of error, and that's the actual error message. So that tells you sort of what type of error you're getting. And then right above that is the line where it'll show you where that error occurred. So here it's in the quick installer tool, line 280 in list installed products. So let's go look at that and see why we might be getting an attribute error with is installed. Oh, and actually, I should say, just go over some of these errors that you might get. These are Python exceptions, nothing ZOP specific. You might get an attribute error if you're trying to access an attribute on an object that doesn't exist. You might get an import error if you're trying to import a module that's not there, or if it has a syntax error. You're going to get an index error if you're working with an array and you try to access an element in that array which isn't actually there. A key error means you're working with a dictionary and trying to access a key of that dictionary, look up something by a value which is not there. And then type error and value error are somewhat similar, but they both have to do with using the wrong data type, so like using a string where it's expecting a number or vice versa. There's also some ZOP-specific exceptions which you might run into. Unauthorized, not found, redirect are all pretty straightforward if you're familiar with HTTP. A traversal error is ZOP's way of going from a URL to some Python object. So traversal error means that there was an attribute error or a key error or some other way it was unable to find what you're looking for. Component lookup error has to do with the ZOP 3 component architecture. If you're getting a utility or an adapter that's not actually existing. And then a conflict error is something you might see if you got really high load. It's a ZODB thing if two people are trying to make changes to something at the same time and the ZODB can't handle that. So let's go look at that code. I've got my omelet up here. I'm going to browse to the line it was talking about. So I'm going to go to products.cmf quick installer tool. Quick installer tool, and then it was line 280. Here we are. So this is the code that's running at that line when we get the error. And if you remember, it was an attribute error is installed. So here we can see it's actually on line 281 that is installed as a period. So this O, whatever it is, doesn't have an is installed attribute. Well, why would that be? If you look at the whole line, again, don't worry about the Python syntax. This is just looping through self.object values, which is the list of names of objects within this within self, which is the quick installer tool. And for each one, it's doing some logic here. So apparently O, and as it loops through, it's calling each thing O. So apparently there's something in the quick installer tool called O, which is not what the quick installer tool is expecting to find there. So as I'm listening to Plone Newbie tell me all this, I'm saying, okay, I wonder what he's got in his quick installer tool that might be causing a problem. Let's go and look at it. So I told him to go browse to the contents tab of the quick installer tool. Well, he obviously can't do that because he's got an error, but I told him the URL, so he typed in manage main, and he gets a list here. I don't know if you can see this, but anybody see anything here that looks a little unusual? CPS skins, and apologies to CPS skins folks if there's anybody here from CPS. That was just what happened to be there. I don't know what the problem was exactly, but that struck me as odd because I wasn't familiar with that product. And so I asked him, why is CPS skins there? And he said, oh, I deleted it, and now the quick installer works. So problem solved. So there's our first case study. What are the lessons here? The problem is sometimes or usually not where you think the problem is. It looked like it was in the quick installer tool, but it was actually, some leftover in the ZODB from who knows what. And next point, the problem may be in what the code's doing, but the problem also may be some state in your ZODB, and you've got to figure out what the problem actually is. Often, you don't have to change any code to fix a bug once you understand what's going on. I'm getting close to the end of the time, so I'm going to be moving along here. But I do want to cover an actual example of the PDB. So this is kind of a contrived case, a little bit, although not entirely. I've got a template here. And what this template is trying to accomplish is it's trying to list out all the documents in your plone site. But if you look at it, it's kind of broken because it's not just finding documents. It's finding folders and smart collections. So something's going wrong. And this is a case where there's not necessarily an exception that leads you right to the source of the error, but something's obviously going wrong and you want to investigate it. So I'm going to, first of all, let me show you the template here. We're calling portal catalog.unrestricted search results, so we're passing in document as the type. So first thing I need to do is I want to stick a PDB in unrestricted search results and figure out what's going on. But first I need to know what unrestricted search results is, what the portal catalog is, where that code is. So to do that, I'm going to go to Clouseau. And I'm going to type in context. This is the same thing that was in the template. Context.portalcatalog.unrestricted search results. And I'm just going to tack on under module, under to print out the Python module in which that appears. And so it tells me it's in products.cmfcore.catalog tool. So let me go find that. And going to put in that line I told you about, import PDB, pdb.setTrace. I'm going to save that. And then I said you have to restart Zope. I'm actually going to cheat because there's this tool called plone.reload where if I just go to here, I can reload the code without restarting Zope. And now I'm going to go back to that view. And oops, I need a test. Thank you. And okay, what's it doing? It's spinning. That's because over in the console, we hit this PDB. And now I've got this prompt here where I can do all sorts of wonderful things. It lists right here the line which is currently being executed. So I'm getting ready to return zcatalog.search results, but the different things I can do here. I can type W and it'll print out a whole stack trace of what's going on. I can type L and it will list the code surrounding where I'm at. But what I want to do is I want to do S, which is going to step into that search results function. And I'm going to do some hand waving here, and there's several levels of functions I'm going through here, which if you're debugging, you're going to be taking your time a little bit more. So let me get to the interesting part, which now we are in a search method, and it's in the zcatalog product, and it's in catalog.py. And if I look at the code here, it's creating this thing called a result set. This is not really important, all this, just showing you how to use PDB. It's going to loop through all of the catalog indexes, and then it's going to kind of build up some results from that. The interesting thing I want to do here is I want to use this command called B, which is a breakpoint. How long do I have? 5 minutes. I'm going to stick that on line 479. And now I can do the C command, which is going to continue, and it's going to go, oh, well, see, that's interesting, because we were expecting to get some results, but we didn't get any results there. I wonder why it didn't find any documents when really what it's printing out at the end is all those documents. Let me, well, first let me remove that breakpoint that I set, but now let me hit this PDB again. Just refresh the page. Going to do the same thing I did before, because I want to investigate what's going on right before that thing where we didn't get the result that we were expecting. So here we are again, and I'm listing out the code, and it's going through self.indexes.keys, right? So we can actually print out what is self.indexes.keys. And we can look and we can see, do we have that type thing that I was looking for? And if you look carefully, you'll see that actually that doesn't appear in here. We've got capital T type, and we've got portal under type, but we don't have lowercase t type. And so, I realize I accidentally lowercased the name of the index. If you look at the comment here, you'll see if it doesn't find any indexes that recognize, it's actually going to return all the results. So that's what's going on here. Problem finally solved. So I've got slides here on PDB commands, which I can't cover, but those will be on the online slides. What did we learn in case 2? If you don't have a traceback, finding the source of misbehavior can be hard. So be persistent, not in the ZOAP 2 sense. Try the most obvious things first. If I had paused way back and looked at my code before I dived in with the PDB, maybe I would have thought, oh, type, that doesn't seem quite right. Don't assume that something's broken in ZOAP or plone. I shouldn't have assumed that something was broken in the catalog when it was more likely to be my code, which is much less well tested. So try the most obvious things first. I've got loads of slides of tips and tricks, which I don't have any time to cover, I'm afraid. These will be online. I'll try to get them online as soon as possible and email you guys, or email the conference list so that you can find these. And if they're unclear, maybe feel free to ask questions. But let me just go through here. Maybe that's a good slide. If you're still stuck after trying some of these tools and techniques, don't hesitate to ask on IRC, or email some Plone developer that you know has more experience, or email the Plone mailing lists. Feel free to ask questions. On the other hand, if you do figure out what's going on, or you're pretty sure that it's an actual bug in Plone and not just a mistake you made, then do file a bug report in the tracker. If you know how to fix it, file a patch and contribute to this great product that we have. So I hope that helps you out. And I suppose I have to be done here. I can close up my slides so that the next presenter can set up. But if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer those as you guys are heading out.